So we're into 1 year since COVID-19 cases first reported from China. 10 months since the World Health Organization declared the COVID-19 pandemic and the beginning of global lockdown. Now we are all well into the second wave of the pandemic crisis. So let me ask you folks, how are we doing now? Particularly, how are we coping mentally and emotionally? How is the condition of our mental health so far? Well, let me give you some statistics and findings on the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on people's mental health. According to the American Medical Association and various medical organizations, there has been relatively high rates of symptoms of anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, psychological distress, and stress overall, reported in general population during the COVID-19 pandemic in countries like China, Spain, Italy, Iran, the United States, Turkey, Nepal, and Denmark. Now that's kind of global representation. And the figure is very high, which is not that surprising for a lot of us. So since the lockdown, grief, isolation, loss of income, and fear trigger mental health conditions or exacerbate existing ones. And many people are facing increased levels of alcohol and drug use and insomnia and anxiety. The levels of psychological distress have reached a significant level in that in many cases it would meet the threshold for clinical relevance. And the report concluded that mitigating the hazardous effects of COVID-19 on mental health is an international public health priority. In other words, as we focus on distributing vaccines to immunize our body from the virus, we also need to focus on addressing how to heal and treat our mental and emotional condition. And as we all know, dealing with the mental health is much more challenging and requires long-term treatment. You see, it's one thing to treat and heal and protect our bodies from the virus. It's totally another matter to treat and heal people from the mental and emotional damages due to the pandemic. And this is especially relevant for the mental health of our young people. Now, this is for your information. Now, based on the various reports, those young people between the ages of 18 to 24 years old have been most at risk on their mental health condition. Over 50% of population of that young people in that age group have struggled and are struggling with the symptoms of various mental health, the signs and symptoms that I've just talked about, the anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, psychological distress, and stress. And especially the stress level, like over 80% of young people are going through this stress symptoms. So compared to the young adults, the older adults, 65 years and older, the pandemic did not affect their mental health as much. And that's surprising. That's an interesting finding, but not unexpected when considering overall mental resiliency in the older generation. You see, older adults tend to have lower stress reactivity and in general better emotional regulation and well-being than younger adults. While the older adults have suffered a lot adapting to the new normal during the pandemic crisis with higher complications and mortality rates due to their physical condition, they're doing much better when it comes to mental and emotional health. They're more resilient to the anxiety, depression, and stress-related mental health disorders characteristic of younger population. The pandemic affects our younger generation, the younger adults, our children and our grandchildren, much more, much deeper, and much longer on their mental and emotional health. It has already left a considerable mark, deep pain of trauma to their mental health. And the damage will linger for long, affecting their future. So the question is, what are we going to do about this? What are we going to do about this? Now, before I go into our text and my talk for today, I just want to propose this question. I usually propose questions at the end of my talk, but I want to put a question before you right now. What is our role, church's role in times like this? As the mental health profession is preparing to address the issue, what and how can the church be a healing agent in times like this? How can we heal our younger generation? So our text for today is from the book of Mark, chapter 1, verses 21 to 28. Now, it's the story of Jesus healing and delivering a man from the evil spirit. So this is important for us to highlight that Jesus' ministry begins with the healing ministry. The healing ministry. I will speak more about that next Sunday, but it's important for us to highlight that Jesus' ministry begins with a healing ministry. So, on the Sabbath day, Jesus was teaching in the synagogue. Now, Mark reports that his teaching amazes people in that place, in the synagogue. In other words, his teaching had that wow effect, not like the scribes' teaching, the traditionalist, the institutionalist, and the legalist. Jesus' teaching had that wow effect, had that disruptive and transformative effect. And Mark doesn't tell us what Jesus taught, but the main point that Mark is trying to make is a connection between what Jesus taught with what Jesus did next. Jesus taught with authority because there was something else about his teaching, about him, that his teaching was not just about classroom or synagogue lecture, but the actual follow-up. Sort of teaching and demonstrating what he taught as one act, not just any sort of demonstration, but delivering a man from an evil spirit. In other words, Jesus performed an exorcism, driving out the evil spirit. Wow, far out. So this is what happens. While Jesus was teaching, a man stood up and shouted to Jesus, "Holy One of God, have you come to destroy us?" Now, this is just my observation of the event as I was reading. I don't know if this man was possessed by an evil spirit, other than Mark did say that the man was with the evil spirit. You see, I don't know what distinguishes an evil possessed person from a normal person, because the only thing that Mark reported was that this man stood up and interrupted Jesus' teaching. That's it. And the other interesting thing is that this man has accurately identified Jesus as the Holy One of God. Now that's remarkable. We know so far at this initial stage of Jesus' ministry, no one could name his true identity, not even his disciples. But this evil possessed man called Jesus out for who he was, the Holy One of God. That's amazing. So, I don't understand why Jesus rebuked him for telling the truth. Well, maybe Jesus was ticked off that he got interrupted, that this guy interrupted his teaching. Or maybe that's why I called Jesus to rebuke him. Why? How dare you interrupt my preaching? I cast you out. You see, at my previous church, I had a retired minister who once in a while interrupted me while I preached. And sometimes he would engage me in a short dialogue in the middle of my talk, which often threw me off from my train of thoughts, because I usually don't use notes when I preach. So when someone interrupts me while I preach, I get derailed from my talk and often get mixed up. So it's important that I don't get interrupted while I preach, but he didn't care. He interrupted me once in a while. But you see, I never rebuked him. I never performed exorcism on him, casting the evil spirit out of him. I have never done that. I mean, sometimes I wanted to, but I have never done that. Because since the congregation really respected him well, I let him just have his space. Well, bless his heart. For your information, he was my dear friend. I consider him as my mentor. So, I don't even do that. So why did Jesus do that? Well, there's something else going on here, something more significant and much fundamental that has to do with the ministry of Jesus as whole, to do with why Jesus was on earth, why God became like us in Jesus in the flesh. You see, up to that point, no one knew the true identity and mission of Jesus, that Jesus came to usher in the kingdom of God to the earth. Thy kingdom come and thy will be done on earth, Jesus said, as it is in heaven. His mission was to bring the heavenly kingdom of God down to earth. And Jesus was about to launch that great mission, about to launch the kingdom of God on earth. Up to that point, the kingdom of Satan roamed free on earth. And now the kingdom of God was dawning in and through Jesus Christ on earth. And of course, the demons would know Jesus' true identity since they are spiritual beings. And they would oppose Jesus since they knew that they were about to be defeated and their time on earth would not last long. Jesus commanded to the demons to be silent has to do with the fact that he does not want them to name him, since in that culture, the one thing that the one doing that naming had more authority than the other being named. And the order to come out of him signals the end of Satan's rule. The time has been fulfilled and the domain of God has come near, which means that God's enemies are beginning to be defeated and that Satan's rule over the world is about to end. So, this event and the interaction have deeper and universal implications than just an act of exorcism. Jesus delivering the man from the evil spirit signals that the time has come for God to deliver the world from the evil powers and forces. That in the kingdom come in Jesus Christ, God is initiating the work of overthrowing the evil and satanic forces of this world. He is doing the work of healing the nations, that God is doing the work of restoring the people. Indeed, the salvation of the people is at hand and kingdom come in Jesus Christ. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And the first thing Jesus did was the casting the evil spirit out of this man, delivering him and healing him. As followers of Jesus Christ, we are called to heal, called to deliver. We are called to cast out the evil spirits in the world, to deliver our world from the satanic forces. So how do we do that? How do we cast out the evil spirits and heal the world? In other words, how do we do the work of exorcism? Well, not with the holy water and the magic spell, although that makes for a great, good Hollywood movies. Well, how? First, we have to name them. Name the evil forces. And second, we have to pray. We have to pray. Now, first, naming the demons is a way to recognize that they exist. In a way, it's the prayer for us to resist against evil. We've got to know the demons, what they are. And we are talking about the root, what is at the bottom, the fundamental evil that exists within. Deeply held, not just one or two bad behaviors, acts, but deeply held, talking about the evil patterns that exist at the bottom and the root. Some time ago, I had a conversation with a young person applying for candidacy for an ordained minister. She shared her life and spiritual journey. And what struck me was her sense of awareness, self-awareness. She was able to name the certain toxic behaviors and patterns keep on occurring in her life that controlled much of her life. But she was able to name them and take control over her life, not being influenced by past events. You see, we've got to know who we are resisting against and who we are casting out. Naming the demons, naming the evil spirit, evil forces out there is a prayer before we cast the evil force out. Many organizations, institutions, and companies, or even families that are stuck and dysfunctional and unhealthy in their interactions and culture have long held evil forces at the root of the cause. Often everyone knows what it is, but afraid to name it for fear of retaliation. So we allow the evil power to roam free, hurting people and making everyone's lives miserable. You see, the first thing to heal people from the bondage of evil forces is to name it. Even when it feels like all hell might break out and break loose, or even it feels like opening the can of worms, we've got to name them. So in the last few years, we have watched a list of courageous people came forward and named the evil forces that are at the root of much destruction. We've all heard about Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, and environmental awareness, and to name just a few. And even recently, we've heard about job harassment and bullying at the top of government, and some came out and named it. So last week, we heard that the Governor General resigned. We've got to name the evil forces at the root. And one of the big ones is the unbelief. Unbelief. That losing our faith in God. That losing our faith in life as a sacred force and losing your faith in our fellow human beings. It is the feeling that nothing can be done to solve our problems. Unbelief is at the core of the root of all other evils. When we find ourselves in a state of unbelief, we can succumb to all other evil forces. We can easily become standing by while the evil force is doing its work, closing our eyes to bullying, becoming indifferent to injustice all around us. Unbelief. We got to name what it is. The unbelief is the evil spirit that I fight against all the time, especially when I feel that certain people are beyond redemption, beyond forgiveness, beyond healing for how they live their lives and how badly they treat other people. If I begin to feel that this person is beyond redemption, that's unbelief. That's unbelief. So we need to name that, unbelief. Then spring from this one come the others. All the other evil forces that we encounter every day. Homophobia, racism, sexism, classism, religious and ideological intolerance and violence at home and at school and poverty and greed, just to name few. We've got to name the evil forces. And then We've got to pray, folks. We've got to pray. Now, praying is not just an individual devotional spiritual practice that puts our minds at ease, but rather it's an intensely personal struggle within each of us and among all of us collectively as disciples and followers of Jesus Christ to resist the despair and distractions that cause us to practice unbelief, to abandon or avoid the way of Jesus. In other words, it is a struggle to believe that change can really happen. A better word is possible. So as I mentioned before, I pray to overcome my unbelief. So let me just conclude my talk. Unless we name the demons, they will name us. They will control us and destroy us. But it takes courage to do so, for it will make us unpopular. Jesus paid a price to deliver and heal the world. So the question is, are we willing to follow Jesus to deliver the world from evil?